NPR reports on Twitter. Who knew? They say the update isn't a huge overhaul of the existing guidance, but it does represent an increasing focus on individuals making their own decisions about their level of risk and how they want to mitigate that risk, said Dr. Marcus Plessia, Chief Medical Officer for, I didn't look up what that is. So NPR's summary of the CDC's updated guidelines, and I'll show you the actual CDC guidelines shortly. The summary has 4 bullet points. Those exposed to the virus are no longer required to quarantine. Unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Students can stay in class after being exposed to the virus, and it's no longer recommended to screen those without symptoms. The second bullet point is the doozy, right? Unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Well, isn't it obvious then that hidden in that bullet point is we recognize that effectively you are the same? That these things for which so many people's lives have been destroyed, and I'm not even talking about the vaccine injured, I'm talking about those who have resisted and therefore have lost opportunities, have lost jobs, have lost family, have lost friends, have lost all of these things, are now, it's going to just quietly slip in, oh, by the way, it's fine. Never mind. Not even in our bad, though. Wow. Not even in our bad. Hold on. Let me put up the actual CDC document. Let me put it up in the PDF form though, so I can show. So here's the CDC document that it's in, yeah. This is from August 11th, a couple days ago. CDC, summary of guidance for minimizing the impact of COVID-19 on individual persons, communities, and healthcare systems, United States, August 2022. They, of course, put out a lot of these things, but this is the most recent one. And if we scroll down to see vaccines and therapeutics to reduce medically significant illness, COVID-19 vaccination. They start by saying COVID-19 vaccines are highly protective against severe illness and death and provide a lesser degree of protection against asymptomatic and mild infection. Then, receipt of a primary series alone, in the absence of being up to date with vaccination through receipt of all recommended booster doses, provides minimal protection against infection and transmission. Being up to date with vaccination provides a transient period of increased protection against infection and transmission after the most recent dose, although protection can wane over time. That is a huge admission. And it's not that suddenly there's a lot of new data out, or there's a lot of new analysis of existing data. No, these are things that we have known, and I don't know what prompted this report now, but what we are seeing is we the CDC are going to put out a report that allows those organizations who have been listening to us as if we are the law, which they are not, to start treating the unvaccinated like full people again, while acknowledging that actually these vaccines, what do they say, provide minimal protection and provide a transient period of increased protection, which wanes over time.
So I agree with the interpretation that you put on it. This is a tacit admission.
Yes.
Right? What it functions as, though, the whole point, and again, longtime viewers and listeners of DarkHorse will remember discussions in which we talk about the fact that sometimes the correct narrative emerges in the end. But what must not happen from the point of view of these power players is that they must not vindicate those who were right about it at the time. So they do not go back and clean up the record. This is a perfect example of that. And I would say that what they are doing, maybe Catholics will bristle at this, but again, this is not an attack on Catholics. What they are doing, though, is effectively doing this by encyclical, right? They are simply updating the wisdom from the oracle, right? The person with the connection to God is telling us what the new wisdom on the vaccines is. And the new wisdom on the vaccines is that the vaccinated and the unvaccinated are equivalent now, right? They are not saying, actually, our old story fell apart so violently that we are forced to backtrack. And you, by the way, probably ought to figure out who was right about that in the first place and start listening to them because they had us beat from the get-go. They will never say that.
No, they will not.
So what they are doing is simply updating the guidance, and you're only supposed to care about the immediate belief structure of the thing that hands down the instructions by fiat. That's why the encyclical works here. And again, it is because whatever it is that has captured the CDC is functioning to create something that fits a religion-shaped hole. A religion-shaped hole is not about figuring the truth of the universe. It's about figuring out what am I to do, right? And what am I to do is, I am now to start treating the vaccinated and unvaccinated equally, which of course you should have done all along, right?
Yeah.
What's more, it lags the reality, right? It does not pay any attention to the accumulating evidence that in fact these vaccines have been harmful, right? Have actually crippled people's immunity. It completely ignores the fact that even the data that they use to argue that these things have some substantial effect that, yes, wanes over time, ignores the fact that they create a vulnerability when you're first given them, right? So this is all, coming down. This is, oh, by the way, there's a burning bush on that mountaintop over there, and I spoke with it. And I came down with the new wisdom about how it is that we are to behave. And you're never going to believe this, but I know that we were busy scorning and throwing out of our homes and our theaters the unvaccinated. But as of now, we're going to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
We encourage you to stop doing that. And, I was for a while on a weekly basis checking for instance, the local theater companies, who's going to let us in. And I gave up a couple months ago. I was like, I'm done. These people are insane and they don't understand anything about reality or science. And they're just never going to let people who didn't take the jabs back in. And it turns out that quietly, without some of us noticing, I just got told yesterday, oh yeah, actually, at least here in Portland, Oregon, suddenly, most of these places are letting in the unvaccinated, aren't checking, aren't asking for negative tests, all of it. And, again, the question that, I'm stuck on, and I know that this is exactly part of what you were talking about. Like, I'm stuck on, what changed? What happened, guys? What happened in your own head? And for the most part, people don't operate that way. I want to know what happened, and I want accountability, and I want some damn apologies at the societal level, and I want this to never happen again. And instead, what we see is, well, what the CDC said. But it's just it's a lot of mumbling and a lot of footnotes, right. And whereas just if you would put on my screen for a moment, Zach, again, a tweet from someone I don't know who this is. Politically Homeless 2 is what they call themselves. A thread regarding the news of the CDC's new guidelines in no particular order. I was not allowed to volunteer at my kids' schools for over a year because I wasn't vaccinated. A family refused to carpool with us because they said they were uncomfortable with their son sharing a car with us. We had been ratted out by a mutual friend who said to the other mom, well, you do know they aren't vaccinated, right? We were uninvited to good friends to share a vacation house with them. A long-standing tradition was ended over medical choice. They all got COVID anyway, of course. My daughter couldn't attend a theater production with her school's theater company because Denver Center rules. 50% of the restaurants and many businesses in our neighborhood were off limits to us. I won't forget which ones. I'm just going to read this because we don't have any of these precise stories, but it's a frickin' match for so many people's experience. We had to eat ice-cold lunches out of a backpack huddled outside with frozen hands when we skied at Vail Resort because we weren't allowed inside the lodges. I could never get warm. I bailed on the rest of the season after just 2 days of my pass. Wasn't worth it. I wasn't allowed to stay in a hotel or eat in any restaurant for a work trip to D.C. I had to cancel it altogether as it made travel there impossible. My husband, having trained already for 6 months, was banned from participating in an Ironman event. A group of his friends told him over text that he was endangering them and their families, and they told him he couldn't stay in the Airbnb with them for a trip they had been planning. They no longer speak to him. I was called a conspiracy theorist by dear friends and was left in the dust by them socially. I would have given one of my kidneys to these friends. They cut me off after a vax that didn't stop transmission or infection. My teens experienced unbelievable amounts of stress. We didn't book a trip. I was disinvited. My husband was fired. So yes, and it goes on and on. I elided some of that. So yes, I am seething a bit right now, having read the CDC's new guidance, knowing that this is what the guidance should have been all along, minus the ridiculous masking. I want apologies and I want assurances that this won't happen again. I know that won't come though. That thread speaks for a tremendous number of people, and even those who became skeptical, who didn't get boosted, who did their first shot or first 2 shots and then said, no, actually no more, I'm not seeing it. This set of experiences is invisible to a majority of Americans, at least, and I think in most of the weird world. And that invisibility means that it is more likely to be able to happen again.
Yes. I, of course, share exactly your sense of ire and your desire for an apology, because, of course, an apology would involve some power to prevent it from happening again.
Yes.
And exactly,
you could reference the apology.
Exactly none of that has been conveyed here.
Right.
Now, of course, again, that is perfectly predictable that it would go through this. So the real question is, those of us in our position, how do we push the point and say, not good enough, not nearly good enough, and here's the never again problem. Okay, we had a system in which reality was arrived at through processes, journalistic processes, dialectic processes, scientific processes. That's how Western civilization works. They bypassed the entire thing. They decapitated it, and they handed us down directly, as if they had gone up a mountain and talked to a fucking burning bush. They handed us directly, as if from God, here is the things you are to believe and to act upon. They were wrong. They did tremendous harm, and they brutally punished those of us who stood up and said, you couldn't possibly know what you're saying. The mechanisms to know do not exist. You are lying if you are claiming to know these things because you couldn't.
Even if your conclusions had been accurate, you are lying in claiming that you can know these things when they claimed to know them because they couldn't possibly have known them at the time. And I love the metaphor of decapitation here, because then what they did is they took the head, no longer attached to the system of science, to the dialectic, to the process by which we actually come to understand truth. They stuck it on a stick and they put it in front of us and had it jaw off at us. And a lot of people believed it, said, okay, that talking head must represent science and truth and reality and democracy. It must. To return to some of the earlier points, to be looking around going like, you guys can see, right? You guys can see that we're at a cliff's edge. And many people are saying, what are you talking about? We're good. It's all good. You can now go to the restaurants, right? So it's fine.
Right. Which to me sounds a little bit like, sorry, we jumped the gun. Jews are now welcome at the restaurants. And it's like, okay, I remember not being welcome there last week. And okay, it's all well and good that I have more restaurants to choose from this week.
I like the salad there, but
now I know. Now I know what you're capable of.
Yes.
And frankly, I'm not going to those restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The point is, okay, you've announced what team you're on, and the fact that your team is playing nice this week is irrelevant to me. You've told me who you are.
I will say too, with regard to, I haven't gone and looked at the various restaurants because I think some of them are also lifting their vaccine mandates here in Portland. But at the theater sites, there's always some fine print, and it's actually the same font size as the regular, but it seems like the fine print that they kind of don't expect you to read, which says we can of course reverse this reversal at any time if guidelines change. Guidelines from whom? On what basis? Is anyone walks in and says, I have guidelines. Oh, okay.
Right.
The guidelines have changed. Therefore, nope, not you.
So what they are is saying, we are on team encyclical,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the encyclical has, of course, we're going to follow the CDC wisdom because, it's the CDC after all. But of course, we're going to follow the current CDC wisdom, and nobody can tell you that except the Oracle, what it's going to look like a month from now. Yeah. So, yeah, there's that.
We're not fortune tellers, are we?
Right. All we can do is follow the CDC, right? Well, no, not when, and this is really the important point, is you do have a choice, right?
Yeah.
The CDC has been wrong the entire time.
Pretty much.
It's been wrong on essentially every major issue. If you had done the opposite of what it suggested, you would have been far better off.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, go to the beach. don't get vaccinated.
Definitely go to the beach.
Do get yourself some ivermectin, some hydroxychloroquine, right?
Get your D.
Get your D, right? All of these things. So the last point I want to make is, what is your real choice? If the CDC is now functioning by oracle and encyclical, right? And Anthony Fauci is the reason everybody's going to medical school, and that tells you exactly what kind of doctors they're going to be.
Does that mean he's both science and medicine? I think it does. Yeah.
That's
the big two.
That's a lot of weight on his rather small shoulders. But anyway,
I don't think there's any reason to talk about his size. There's so many reasons to rail against Anthony Fauci.
He's a giant. There's no question about it. No, I mean that. He is a giant. He's a giant threat to our medical well-being. But nonetheless, here's the thing. In this process, it was necessary for this oracle, encyclical, fatwa, cancel process, the one that declared malinformation to be terrorism, and then in the fine print said, oh, malinformation are true things that cause you to distrust your government, right? That's your Department of Homeland Security. It was necessary to target people who were using some other process, spotted the CDC guidance as nonsense, and were speaking about it openly, basically trying to use the process that Western civilization naturally does use.